I wake up the morning after a typical night in Tokyo with my buddy Aaron, which means I smell like an ashtray and I feel like a warm highball. But it was a beautiful day, and Aaron suggested we rent a car and head out to something called the Meeting of the R's at Fuji Speedway. Fuji Speedway is one of the most iconic racetracks in the world. Its dramatic backdrop of Japan's tallest mountain makes it one of the most visually stunning venues in the entire wide world of sports. Its main straight is one of the longest for a permanent circuit, stretching nearly a mile, allowing cars to reach speeds exceeding 300 kilometers an hour, and I got to see that firsthand. I literally got the chills standing alongside the track watching some of the hundreds of Skyline GT-Rs that gathered in the shadow of Fuji-san zoom by at near top speed. It almost made me forget about my highball hangover. Almost. So what is the Meeting of the R's? It's the largest gathering of Nissan Skylines and GT-Rs. It takes place every year at Fuji Speedway. Organized by GT-R Magazine, the event gathers GT-R enthusiasts, owners, fans from around the world to showcase one of Japan's most legendary automotive lineages, with hundreds of cars on display ranging from pristine stock models to highly customized builds, some of which look kind of like trash. The event serves as a living museum of the Skyline and the GT-R. It's not really a car show, it's not really a race, it's more of a community gathering that highlights the passion of these Skyline GT-R owners. Attendees not only display their cars, but they also can participate in track sessions, allowing the GT-R to show its true performance potential on one of Japan's most famous circuits. For fans and owners alike, the Meeting of the R's offers a rare chance to celebrate the history, engineering, and culture of the GT-R in an amazing, unforgettable setting. Before we got there, we stopped at a rest area only about 15 minutes from the speedway to pick up some Boss coffee. Real quick about these rest areas in Japan. Unlike in the U.S., where rest areas are basically small parking lots, you buy some Lance Toasty crackers, urinate in a trough, dispose of a body, and pay for sex acts from a hobo. Japanese rest areas are clean. They typically have excellent facilities like staffed restrooms, restaurants, a konbini, like your 7-Eleven or your Family Mart, even high-end organic Whole Foods like grocery stores at some of these rest stops. And with the car culture in Japan, the stops become de facto car shows on the weekend. Great for car spotting, must do if you're a car guy in Tokyo. I'm going to make a video about that soon enough. The most famous of these is the Daikoku area, for example, but I digress. We're at this rest stop. This fleet of red Ferrari 308s driven by these old Japanese dudes show up. These guys stretch their legs out before going to Fuji Speedway to flex on all the lowly domestic vehicle, disgusting Nissan drivers, at least in my mind. That's what they were doing. And I cringe at myself as an American whose only experience with the Skyline is Gran Turismo and the Fast and Furious series of films 1 through 27. It's a shock to see this many GT-Rs in one place. We don't have them in the U.S. The Skyline didn't meet those lame U.S. safety standards during much of its production years, but come on, you don't buy a Skyline because you want to be safe. You buy a Skyline because you want to be dangerous. Complying with regulations like crash testing, airbag requirements, emissions controls would have required significant modifications, which would have been costly and time-consuming for Nissan. Not to mention Skylines were also right-hand drive, meaning they'd have to make a left-hand drive model. Moreover, Nissan already had sports cars in the U.S., the 240SX and the 300ZX, which it would have to compete with, alongside the less expensive and more popular American cars, the Ford Mustang, the Chevy Corvette, and the Camaro. Yeah, we can get the most recent version of the GT-R in the U.S., known as the R35, but it starts at $121,000 with a T, which is more than a base Porsche 911, and it strays from the previous ethos of the GT-R being an affordable way to beat the brakes off of your asshole dentist neighbor's Ferrari. The prior generation of this car, known as the R34, debuted in 1999 for the equivalent in Japan of $45,000 US. But to be fair, that's $85,000 adjusted for inflation in 2025 bucks. How many of you feel very old right now? Now let's look at the other end of the timeline. The original Prince Skyline began production in the 1950s. Prince merged with Nissan in 1967. 1969, Skyline GT-R debuts. While it's an incredible car that won 49 major races in a row before production stopped due to the 1973 oil crisis, the Prince Skyline doesn't quite fit within the lineage of the modern GT-R that enthusiasts recognize today, starting with the R32 model in 1989, which resumed after a 16-year hiatus in Skyline production. Indeed, with mergers, 10 or so generations of the Skyline, different generations of the GT-R, homologation models, race models, special editions, the Skyline GT-R's history is more confusing than the Targaryen family tree. At the meeting of the R's, we're talking about the 8th, 9th, and 10th generation of the Skyline. That's respectively the R32, R33, and R34. The R32, introduced in 1989, is where the modern-day Skyline really takes off. Powered by the RB26 DETT engine, a 2.6-liter twin-turbo inline-six producing 276 horsepower, it was built to conquer Group A racing, and it did. With its advanced all-wheel drive system and electronic torque distribution, it beat so much ass on the track that it earned the nickname Godzilla in Australia. Of course, the Australians come up with a quasi-racist nickname for a car. The GT-R was so dominant that it was functionally banned from Australian racing for some bullshit pretextual failure to meet side impact crash safety tests or something. It's lightweight and it's raw, making it a favorite among purists, although aging electronics and rust can be issues if you're looking to buy one. Before we get to the R33, I want to mention a gentleman's agreement among the Japanese automakers in the 80s and 90s to limit the advertised horsepower of their cars to just 276 horsepower to avoid a horsepower war and to address concerns about rising street racing accidents in Japan. While official figures adhered to this limit, the actual performance of many of the vehicles would often exceed 276 horsepower, like the R33, introduced in 1995. It carried over the same engine from the R32, but it added a stiffer chassis, better aerodynamics, and improved safety features like airbags. Officially rated, wink wink nod nod, 276 horsepower, it really pushed out about 300 horsepower. The R33 offers a smoother ride and more stability than the 32, but it's heavier, which can make it feel less agile. Then comes the R34 in 1999, the big splash, regarded as the pinnacle of Skyline GT-R lineage and what brought it to the West. Same engine as the 32 and the 33, but the R34 adds cutting-edge technology for the time, like a multi-function display with real-time performance data. Again, the R34 was officially rated at how many horsepower? 276, but it produced 330. The R35 GT-R, a little controversial. I still think it's kind of cool, but a lot of people don't consider it to be a real Skyline. It's not even called a Skyline. It was introduced in 2007, broke away from the Skyline name, adopted a new 3.8-liter twin-turbo V6, delivering supercar performance, up to 600 horsepower from the factory in newer iterations. Yeah, it's faster and it's more modern than its predecessors, but it lacks the soul, charm, wit, and character of the earlier Skylines. Hundreds of these R32s, 33s, 34s, 35s, all on display at the show. You had your typical car show stuff, like the setup behind the spectator seating with hot Japanese girls peddling parts, upgrades, and accessories, YouTubers and podcasters, losers, running around, and even some cosplayers who might have thought that this was the Dragon Ball GT convention. At the end of the day, there was a mega rally of all generations of Skylines on the track in the afternoon right before the show closed up, which was amazing. The attendees gathered on the sunny hillsides over Fuji's track to watch this storm of Skylines take to the road before the show shut down for the day. Going to Fuji Speedway, attending the meeting of the R's, gave me a whole new appreciation for the Skyline GT-R, for Japan, for Japanese car culture. Even as someone who's never driven a Skyline and doesn't necessarily want to own one, I can see why they're so revered. Seeing these cars in action gave me literal goosebumps. It was incredible. I loved meeting the passionate community that surrounds the Skyline. You could tell that people drove from all over the country. There were people sleeping in their cars. They drove overnight. They were bush. If you want to get a GT-R, you'll need to import it. If you're in the U.S., there are a number of exporters. I've used several of them. I became friends with Aaron, who I mentioned earlier in this video at Bulldog Auto, after he handled the export of my Subaru Sandbar van. I've used him ever since, as have many of you guys who have watched my channel and who have listened. Sound off in the comments if you guys have used Aaron. He does a great job. What's so great about a Skyline?
Bulletproof engines, all-wheel drive, super lots of modifications available. It just was like the perfect storm.
It's a sexy really car too.
Beautiful cars, and it was a good step up from a lot of the stuff in the in that era. Before that, you had you know, you had, you know, some other cars. The Supra was, you know, the Mark III Supra was out, and it was okay and stuff. But when they came out with that RB26 and the all-wheel drive, it really stepped up the game for all the other manufacturers. You know, you see that later where they followed suit and came out with some really special cars of their own. You know, the newer RX-7, the Mark IV Supras, when they came out, they were all kind of, at that point, sort of chasing the Skyline in the, you know, the Japanese sports car game, because it was so revolutionary and cool at the time.
If I'm in the U.S. and I've got to get a car that's, you know, it's got to be 25 years old or older, what Skylines are available to me? And as we sit here today, end of 2024, thereabouts the last quarter of 2024, how much can I get a decent one for?
It kind of depends, mileage, modifications, condition, whatnot, but 32s, you probably start getting decent cars at 3.5, 4 million. 33s, a bit the same, maybe a touch more. 34s, they're going to be double that. You know, they're 7 or 8 million to kind of the start now. And if you want a special version, which some of them are not eligible for the US, but like the NER editions and the V-Spec 2s, some Skylines can be 30 million, 40 million Japanese yen these days.
Shit.
Super low mileage, rare color type of cars.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this look at the meeting of the R's, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what your favorite Skyline GT-R generation is. Take care.